Bonjour à tous and welcome to this video on French relative pronouns. Now this is quite a big topic, so I'm going to split it into several different videos. In this one we're going to be learning the most common and therefore the most important relative pronouns in French, qui and que. But before we get on to that, we need to know what they are. What do relative pronouns do? And quite simply, they relate to clauses. That's why they're called relative pronouns. Okay, so they link two things together. For example, we could say, I saw a film, I liked the film. But this is quite robotic. People don't really speak like that. Instead, you're more likely to say something like, I saw a film that I liked. And the word that here is the relative pronoun because it's linking the two things together and squishing them into one sentence. Similarly, we could say, I have a car, the car is red, but it's a bit mechanical. Who really says that? Instead, you'd say something like, I have a car which is red, and so which is your relative pronoun. Of course, you could also say that. You could say, I have a car that is red. But the word itself is not that important. The point is that there is a word that you can use to link the two things together. You could also say, I have a wife, she is a doctor. Or you could put them together and say, I have a wife who is a doctor. And so who is also a relative pronoun in English. And actually there are many more. This is by no means an exhaustive list. They're just some that came to my mind. That, which, who, whom, whose, where, when. And then they can also have prepositions. So we can say things like of which, for which, with whom, by whom, etc., etc. And they're also quite numerous in French. We have things like qui, que, dont, où. They can have prepositions in French as well, so preposition plus lequel, laquelle, lesquels, lesquels, preposition plus qui, ce que. Basically, there are a lot, and for a lot of people this is quite scary because they think, well, how am I ever going to learn how to use them all? But fret not, dear viewers, for we are going to break them down into much more manageable chunks. And as I said before, in this video we're just going to focus on qui and que, and once you've got these ones down, the others will be much simpler. So, qui versus que, often regarded as one of the most difficult questions in the French language. How do I know when to use one or the other? And the problem is that they don't work in the same way as English relative pronouns. We've already seen that in English we can kind of just use what we want. We can say that, we can say which, we can say who. Okay, it doesn't always really matter that much, whereas qui and que are very strict. And also, we can't just rely on translations. We can't just say, oh, qui means this, and que means something else, right? Because it just doesn't work that way. A lot of people look at qui and think, well, qui means who, right? And that is correct when you're asking a question, but not when it's a relative pronoun. You're not just going to use qui when you use who in English. Sometimes you'll find that you use qui when you say who, you'll use qui when you use that, okay? It just doesn't work that way. Sometimes qui and que will translate to the same word in English, sometimes they'll mean something completely different, okay? So we need to think about it in a different way, and that way is slightly more grammatically than we do in English, and that's what scares people because that G word, we must avoid it. But it's okay, because there are different approaches we can take. The first approach is theoretically the easiest, but it's less reliable, okay? So it will work in the majority of cases, but not always. So the way I put it is, if you're speaking quickly, you're trying to avoid hesitation, use this rule, okay? Because in most cases, you'll be absolutely fine, there won't be a problem. But if you're writing or you're spending more time on something or you need to be more accurate, then the second rule that we'll learn in a few minutes will be much, much more reliable for you. But let's stick with the first one for now. Let's keep it simple. This rule is qui plus verb, que plus noun or pronoun. And as I said, this will work in the majority of cases. For example, let's have that sentence we had before. I have a car which is red. So we already know in English the relative pronoun is which. So then we look at the word that follows, that is. Is this a noun, a pronoun, or a verb? Well, quite clearly it's a verb. If you don't know that, you shouldn't be watching this video, right? So is the present tense third person singular conjugation of to be, okay? And so we have relative pronoun plus verb, and therefore we will use qui, okay? So we will say j'ai une voiture qui est rouge. I'm not going to talk about the grammar of the rest of the sentence because we're really not bothered about the rest of that at the moment. Okay, let's try another example. I saw a film that I liked. So this time our relative pronoun is that, and the word that comes after it is I, okay, which is not a verb. I is in fact a pronoun, and so we will use que. So we would say, j'ai vu un film que j'ai aimé. So this rule works in those two cases, and as I said, in most simple sentences will work quite nicely. But there are some cases where it won't always work. For example, let's try this one. The dress that the woman is wearing. Now you'll see I've not finished this sentence because really what follows is not important, and so I don't want to add any more confusion by adding anything just yet. Okay, let's go through the same method. Our relative pronoun is that, and it is followed by the woman, which is a noun. Okay, and so by that logic we will use que, which is absolutely correct. La robe que la femme porte, blah 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 blah. This is perfect. Wonderful, our method has worked. So let's finish the sentence off. As I said, it could really be anything. In this case, I've chosen the dress that the woman is wearing is white. La robe que la femme porte est blanche. Okay, so far we've not broken our rule at all, so you might be wondering, well, what are you going on about? This rule is perfectly fine. But wait, because we could say la robe que porte la femme est blanche. So we've switched the words porte and la femme. Okay, and now we have broken our rule because we have que followed by a verb. But this is grammatically correct and in fact means exactly the same thing. The dress that the woman is wearing is white. And this is where we prove that translating word for word does not work, because if you do that in English, we get the dress that wears the woman is white, which of course makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But in French, it does mean exactly the same thing as before. The dress that the woman is wearing is white. If anything, it's slightly more eloquent, a little bit more refined, but for all intents and purposes, it is exactly the same sentence. So how do we account for that? We'll see in a moment. First of all, though, there's another reason why this method doesn't always work. For example, if we say, l'homme qui me regarde, okay, which means the man who is looking at me. Okay, so we have the word qui, okay, a relative pronoun, but that is followed by me, which is a pronoun. So surely we should be using que. Well, no, okay, we should indeed be using qui. So this method that we've been using so far, it works sometimes, but not all the time. So it's best to use this rule instead. It is slightly more grammatical. You do need to be able to identify the subject and the object of a verb, but once you've done that, it's fine, okay? So remember, the subject of a verb is the person or thing doing the action, and the object is the person or thing at the receiving end of the action. Okay, that's all you need to know. So we have subject plus qui, object plus que. Notice this time we're concerned with what comes before the relative pronoun and not what comes after it, and this is very, very important. Okay, so let's go back to those examples we've already done. I know our method before worked with these, but let's just demonstrate that this method works as well. I have a car which is red. Our relative pronoun is which. We already know that it's followed by the verb is. But remember, that's not important. What we want to know is what is the word before the relative pronoun doing? Okay, a car. Is it the subject or the object of the verb is? Well, quite clearly, the car is the thing that is doing the being. Okay, it is the car that is red, therefore it is the subject. In fact, this sentence has no object. Okay, and because we have subject and then the relative pronoun, we'll use qui. Okay, so just as we had before, j'ai une voiture qui est rouge. Wonderful. The other example we had, I saw a film that I liked. The relative pronoun again is that. The verb is liked. Who is doing the liking? Is it the film? No. Okay, the film isn't the thing that liked the film. Okay, I am the one that liked the film. So I am the subject, and that comes after the relative pronoun. So we're not bothered about that. What we're bothered about is what comes before it. Okay, and the word film is, of course, the object of the verb liked. I liked the film. The film is the thing that is being liked. And because we have object, then the relative pronoun, we will use que. J'ai vu un film que j'ai aimé. So now we have two methods that come out with the same answer, right? But what about that other example we had? The dress that the woman is wearing is white. Well, we had that, the relative pronoun. The verb is wearing. The woman is the person doing the wearing, right? So the woman is the subject. And so again, we're not going to use qui because the subject comes after the relative pronoun. What comes before it is the dress, which is the thing that is being worn. Therefore, it is the object. We have object plus que. So we will say, la robe que la femme porte est blanche. But remember, we could also say, la robe que porte la femme est blanche. But notice this time we've not broken the rule, because we still have object que, la robe que. Okay, that doesn't change. Remember, what follows isn't important. We're concerned with what comes before the relative pronoun. And because of that, what we do after the relative pronoun really doesn't matter. Okay, we can put the verb here or there or anywhere. It doesn't really make a difference. What is important is what comes before it. And in both cases, that is la robe, the object of the verb porter. And so let's have a quick summary to make sure we know where we are, right? We could use the rule qui plus verb, que plus noun. Okay, this works in the majority of cases, and if you're looking for a quick response, it's a good way to think about it without trying too hard, without spending too much time on it. You could then extend those rules, okay? I didn't really speak about this, but you could say, well, we use qui if it's directly followed by a verb, as long as there's nothing in between. So that would solve the problem with l'homme qui me regarde, because you've got qui, which is then followed by a pronoun, then a verb, so it's not directly followed by it. And then we have que plus noun pronoun when the word order is the same as in English, so that solves the la robe que porte la femme, la robe que la femme porte problem. But then you're just adding conditions and conditions and conditions onto these rules. So what started out as a relatively simple rule has now become very, very complex. So though it may be conceptually quite simple, there are lots of things to be thinking about. Whereas the second rule, subject qui, object que, though more grammatical, though perhaps more difficult to understand conceptually, is simpler because that is it. Okay, and really it's not that difficult to understand. Subject, object is quite a simple grammatical concept. Okay, subject, personal thing doing the action, object, personal thing on the receiving end. Once you've got that, this rule is by far the simplest. Okay, you are at liberty to use whichever rule you like, but just know that the second one is more reliable because it works 100% of the time. I defy you to find an example of a sentence where that doesn't work. If you do, I commend you, well done, okay, but I doubt you will, because that is the exact definition of the distinction between qui and que. Qui refers to the subject, que refers to the object, and so if you know that, you will be right 100% of the time. But, as I've probably said about 3,000 times now, the first rule, qui verb, que noun, is alright in many cases, okay? You don't always have to change the word order. There isn't always an object pronoun in the way or anything like that, so it will work for you if you need it. But to be 100% sure, subject qui, object que. So that is it for this video. In the next video, we'll have a look at dont and see where the hell that's come from. But until then, à bientôt.